fish are friends, not food.
I'm a little worried about Rob.
Yes, it's happening.
Ever since we tried to summon Cthulhu, he hasn't been the same.
I'm growing gills. My transformation into a deep one has finally begun.
Rob, we don't see any gills.
It's these kids getting involved in all this stuff causes them to go crazy.
I think I feel the webbing starting to grow between my fingers.
Welcome to Dinner and a Board Game, a new actual play show about friends, good food, and lots of fun at the gaming table. We're your hosts, Megan and Heath. Each night, I'll invite the gaming group over to my house to cook dinner, sample drinks, and play a board game on one of our customized board game boards. Dinner and a Board Game is an actual play show where you'll be able to watch the game from start to finish with gameplay dashboards and graphics that help track the turns and allow everyone to follow the game's action. We'll play games like Zombicide, Black Plague, Descent, Journeys in the Dark, Small World, Unearth, and Terraforming Mars. We'll even be joined by special guests such as Lou Anders, J.F. Lewis, and cosmic horror artist David LaRocca. The show is free to watch on YouTube. Just come by my channel, Heath Robinson, and be sure to subscribe. Click Watch Now to start the first episode and join us for fun-filled evenings of dinner and a board game. And now it's time for Table Talk, where we'll be talking about the creative and business side of making things in the tabletop and fantasy genre. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Table Talk. Yes, I know it is the afternoon, and so we're at a little bit of different time here. Thank you very much for joining us here. Ordinarily, we're on the evenings, but I've got a very special guest this afternoon. This is Jamey Stegmaier. He is probably one of the most successful people in crowdfunding and independent board game production, and he's been highly influential on me with not only all of the products that he's been bringing out, but also he runs a blog which is all about crowdfunding and building businesses yourself. And as we are talking about here on Table Talk, both the business and creative side of trying to make things in the tabletop and fantasy kinds of genres, he is an ideal guest. So I'm going to bring him on right now and let him talk to you. Hello, Jamey. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for that nice introduction. I really appreciate that.
Well, I have really wanted to be able to talk to you. I know we've sent a few different emails back and forth, and I'm a reader of your blog. I subscribe to it, and then also we do have your book here as well, The Crowdfunding Strategy Guide. Yes, which, when did this book come out?
It came out almost 7 years ago. I wrote it 8 years ago, and I have it handy because I've been doing kind of a live book club just recently where I go through it chapter by chapter and talk about how it applies to 2022 instead of 2014 whenever I wrote it. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know you were doing that. Because I had thought about it. I've read it, and I had thought about it as part of a text for a book on, for a course on creative entrepreneurship or business or something like that. And I hadn't gotten to thinking about how to update it yet, because it's been a while. So are those recordings still available? Like, do you record them live and then put them up?
Yeah, I do them on the Stonemaier Games Facebook page every other Thursday. The next one will actually be tomorrow, and then I put them on YouTube so people can. In fact, the best part of it really is the discussion, because that's a great way for people to ask me questions from the 2022 perspective, and I try to answer them based on the philosophies I talk about in the book.
Okay. Well, actually, we jump right into that. But do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do, who you are, and then we will get into it?
Yes. So, I'm Jamey Stegmaier. I run a tabletop game company called Stonemaier Games based in St. Louis, Missouri. Founded around 10 years ago, not 12 years ago, 10 years ago in 2012 with a game called Viticulture. And since then, we've released a total of 13 games and a bunch of related products. We're probably best known for Scythe, Viticulture, and Wingspan. And along the way, I've started a lot of ancillary content as well. The Stonemaier Games blog, like you mentioned, that talks about crowdfunding and entrepreneurship and running a business. Many of the mistakes that I've made along the way, I talk a lot about those. I have a board game design YouTube channel where I talk about my favorite mechanism in pretty much every game that I play. And I include also other content there, like the book club that I'm doing right now, my Facebook live streams where I just answer questions live every week for about an hour on Facebook, and some other content as well. So that's who I am in a nutshell, I think.
All right. Thank you. I should let everybody know that we'll have this entire conversation unedited on YouTube as it is, as we've talked about it right here as we talk live. But also, I'll probably clip some of the questions that we talk about and the answers on the creative side and put it on this channel. But there is another channel. I run a secondary channel, Heath's Business for Creatives. And this channel is actually very much inspired by your kind of blog about crowdfunding and things like that, because you can find all of my lessons and thoughts about crowdfunding and running a creative business over there. I think a lot of our stuff is going to be on the business side of things, so it may end up being that a lot of them are clipped and put over there if anyone who's watching is looking for it in the future.
Cool.
Okay, so here is my first question then. You are one of the most productive people that I know. And like every time I'm not doing something, I see one of your emails come in with the blog, a blog that you posted or something you're talking about, and you're talking about all of this ancillary stuff that you're doing beyond just the creating or the publication of games. How are you able to maintain this massive level of productivity?
That is a great question. I don't exactly have a magical answer to it, but I have some things that I do that seem to help. Part of it is that I set aside a lot of time to work. As I'm sure you do too. A lot of people listening to this probably do that as well. I basically have a commitment that every day I work. I wake up at 7 o'clock. I go right to work because I work from home. I work for about 4 hours, and then I work for another 6 hours in the afternoon, and then another 2 hours in the evening. So I have lots of time to work. Not all of it is the most productive or efficient time, but having a lot of time really does help for getting things done. But also I try to structure that time so that I'm doing certain things in the morning. Oftentimes that they're kind of either responsive and reactive things or content creation. That's usually when I write the blog or when I film videos in the morning. And the afternoon is spent kind of cleaning up certain things that pop up in the morning, dealing with things that I didn't expect. People contacting me throughout the business day with things I didn't expect, and working on project management and game development. And then the 2 hours I set aside at night is for game design and creative time, because I find that I'm the most fulfilled every day when I get a little bit of that in. I don't need a full day of that, but I need a little bit of that every day. So I don't even know if productive is the right word, but structured is maybe a word that I think about when I think about my day. Does any of that connect to how you structure your day or how you prioritize things?
Well, I find that I am most happy with myself when I am most structured. But I find that it comes in waves, because when things are going well, I always find that snowballs and other things start to go well, and you can keep. But then as soon as something, when something starts to fall apart, it's very easy to kind of snowball in the other direction and then get out of everything, and then everything starts going downhill. And you're talking about, I work here at the house as well alone, and I find when you're on the downswing, that's a negative to doing the kind of things we do, because there's nobody to pull yourself out but you. Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. Other than the internet, which is not always a good place to turn to when you want to be pulled out of the doldrums.
Yeah. Right, it's not. At least that's what I find. There may be segments of it, but generally no. What about your growth has been tremendous. We're talking about success in crowdfunding and also independent game publishing, just crowdfunding and business development in general. It seems like you've also been on an incredible growth trajectory. What is it that is a key factor to not only doing one project and getting to the next one? Because I feel like that's something that happens a lot. Okay, you get the project done and it's just enough to get you through until you do the next project. But you're really on a growth trajectory. What is the key in that?
Well, the interesting thing there to me, maybe the ironic thing, is that growth has never really been an objective for me. Personally, personal growth, yes. Improving, getting better, that type of growth, yes. But as a company, I haven't sought to increase the number of employees. I haven't sought to increase our revenue or the number of subscribers or anything like that. Those numbers have never really been important to me. They've kind of been the result of trying to focus on bringing joy to people, and everything I do is trying to make something that I think will bring joy to people's tabletops or to their experiences somewhere around the business, the tabletop or business space. So growth has kind of just happened along the way. Like even up until 2 years ago, I was the only full-time employee at Stonemaier Games, even though by then we were over a $10 million company in terms of annual revenue. And then I decided that I needed a little bit of help with certain areas that I was mostly just bringing in independent contractors. So I hired one person and then hired one other person later that year. And I'm kind of happy with the 3 full-time employees. I think will probably persist that way for a long time. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Like we have definitely grown by the numbers. We definitely have, but it has not been an objective of ours.
Well, that's interesting. So it's the consequence of, you said, focusing on bringing joy.
Yes. Yeah.
So you did say you were doing this this live book discussion and things like that, because I was interested in thinking about how do we teach this creative entrepreneurship? How do we teach this? Because I used to teach college, and when it seems like people talk about funding something or getting a business off the ground, okay, many of the professors have not actually done that. And when I look at the materials, sometimes they'll be like, how can you raise money? And there'll be a bullet point that says, try crowdfunding. And then that, that's it. That's it. But, none of it, you put out the material on the blog, which is a lot more practical. I've tried to do this on YouTube. How do we actually teach creative entrepreneurship today?
The best way that I found, so I was actually just talking about this with someone the other day, because someone's doing a guest post for my blog. Sometimes people write guest posts. And typically when someone approaches me with a guest post, I ask them to kind of list some key points that they might want to cover in the post. And typically those 3 points are them trying to teach something to someone else, like basically saying, this is how you should do this thing. And the number one thing that I always reply with, and I say is, instead of telling me or telling the reader what to do, share your experience as to what you have tried and what you are doing. And I think that sticks so much better in people's minds and often provides a much stronger foundation. And so you're asking how to teach things. And I found the best way, especially on my blog, is to share the things that I have tried to do and what I have personally learned from them, rather than telling someone else what to do. I learn so much better when I hear people talk like that. And so I try to talk the same way and speak the same way when I write on the blog in particular. Can you relate to that? Does that make sense? I think you talk about it the same way. You talk about your experiences a lot when you talk about things.
Well, I do talk a lot about my experiences, which leads me to where I would go, where I want to go with the next question is, because, okay, we can talk about our experiences. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I started this creative journey was to, go where I'm trying to get to, but then also leave a path for people to follow. And, things like the crowdfunding campaigns with Kickstarter, that, the page is still there. If you want to go and see the very first one, the page is still there. Yeah. But the world changes very rapidly. And sometimes I think, well, you could go back and you could say, well, you can follow your trajectory or my trajectory. But going back and looking at some of the old crowdfunding campaigns, I actually thought about doing that. Like, okay, here's this campaign from 10 years ago, but this would never work today. So if somebody goes back and says, oh, look, this is what he did, I'm going to do that. That may not work. Right. So how do we... Is blog and YouTube constantly updating? How do we, if we're trying to communicate our information to people so that other people can do the same things, and create things, how do we handle that information can go out of date quickly?
That is a massive question. I've thought about it a lot. Thought about that question a lot this year in particular. I think the good news answer to that is that what is happening like right now or today is much more easily discoverable. It feels more relevant. It feels more discoverable to someone who is stumbling upon your YouTube channel today for the first time, for example. They're probably going to watch the most recent videos first, and then they might go, and then that leaves the second part of the question: where do they go next? If they really like your content, how are they going to continue to learn from it? And I think YouTube does some helpful things, like they let you sort your videos by different categories. They let people sort them by most popular, things like that. But that is a question I don't have a great answer to it, because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. Like how with all the archived content that I've created, how can I help people find that content and learn from it so that I'm not just writing the same blog post every year for people to kind of refresh people's memories? Yeah.
I try to, like on my YouTube channel, I was planning things out to do things that I think are going to be rather timeless.
Yeah.
That if you discovered in 3 years, you will come by. But that does mean that some things will be left out. Like, for instance,
Right.
if you were very successful by building a community on Facebook groups. So, I mean, you can go into a lot of detail about Facebook groups, but Facebook groups 7 years ago, or I mean, whenever they started, they completely different algorithms change. So, following somebody's advice from, well, I did it through Facebook groups. Somebody else would say email lists, that seems very difficult. Like somebody's got to jump in someplace, and the now is different from years ago.
Totally. Yeah. I think one thing that I do a little bit is every now and then when it doesn't work with YouTube as well, but the blog post, I can go back to any old blog post and edit it. And every now and then I go back and I look through older blog posts to see if something needs to be updated. I just put a big update block at the top and say, hey, here's a more recent article that applies more to this topic or completely contradicts this thing that I talked about before. But it's hard to catch all of that back content and update it on an ongoing basis. And it's very difficult in video format.
On video format, that is difficult. Yeah, you basically have to shoot new video, and that's difficult. And it's difficult to let people know the new one is out there.
Yeah.
If you were starting fresh today, could you do it again? You could do what you've done again?
I think it would be a lot more difficult. I got into the crowdfunding space. I got into it and out of it before it really exploded. Like I got into it in 2012 with the viticulture campaign when there were not a bunch of tabletop game campaigns. There weren't a lot of campaigns at all launching. Like it was normal for one campaign to launch a day, one game related campaign. Now it's normal for dozens to launch every day, especially on certain days of the week. And so I think it's a lot harder to gain traction as a new creator, and a lot harder to even start the community that you need to get off the ground. So I don't know. I doubt it. If I was starting from scratch, it would be a lot harder, and I would feel very fortunate if I could. But I feel very grateful that I got started when I did, and really also that I moved on from Kickstarter after my 2015 campaign and moved the company into a different level after that.
Well, I think I appreciate that honest answer, because with all of this, I don't want to just tell people, hey, it's all sunshine. That the internet brings new opportunities, but then it also makes things more difficult. There are new challenges. And I guess this goes back to what we were saying, that just because you see how somebody did it, oh, you should use Kickstarter or use crowdfunding more broadly. That doesn't necessarily mean that may even work today.
Right.
Which is not great news, but it is the reality of our situation, right?
Well, yeah, and I don't want to discourage anyone through that, but I think, like you said, I think it's good to be realistic about it. Realistic about the possibility of not funding or not. I don't want to say failing or succeeding, because you can learn so much even if your campaign doesn't succeed. But yeah, I think being realistic about it in 2022 is very important.
What in order to make something successful, there are so many different moving parts that all have to hit right and at the same time. And that can include things like geopolitical elements.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go through Brexit and figure out what to do with that. Or now we're dealing with higher shipping costs. And it seems like with board games, there was a whole bunch of conditions that came together that all happened to be right at a certain time that allowed us to do what we all did, and yourself perhaps most successfully. What do you think? Are there systemic changes that you think are coming that's like beyond crowdfunding being more difficult? Product manufacturing, like, are the elements changing that we need to be aware of in the world?
It's really hard to predict the future. I wish I could, because I've been as surprised, I think, as anyone over the last couple of years with how the pandemic impacted the tabletop space. In many ways, it impacted in a very good way for the first year. A lot of people were at home, were looking for something to entertain themselves at home, and then that started to impact the freight shipping space and manufacturing, things like that. So And then Russia attacked Ukraine, and that impacted the world
Right.
in a way that we didn't anticipate. I don't think that will happen with, say, China and Taiwan. I don't think something like that will happen. But if it did, I think that would have a huge impact, not just on the tabletop gaming space, but on manufacturing, on the entire world economy. If something got in the way, something big got in the way of China being the manufacturing leader of the world. And I wish I could say that there were solutions around that, but I know you've delved into that. You've talked about that, about manufacturing elsewhere. It's very difficult. But yeah, I wish I knew the future. I just kind of have hopes, and I've tried to have backup plans. Yeah.
Well, it's a weird thing to think about, that if you are an independent creator and you just want to get started, first of all, people are expecting you to be global from day one, like your tremendous logistics and shipping network, but also the time horizon that something like a Kickstarter game can take, sometimes years. Now, to me, shorter, to get to completion, get to fulfillment. And then you got to be thinking about, well, what if China invades Taiwan in the middle, by trying to get this manufactured? And that's one of the things I think the internet makes harder, because now we're so connected and everything is global. If it were just a store down the street, maybe not influence that as much.
Right. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. If you're making something in your garage, it's totally different than if you're making 10,000 of something halfway around the world and shipping it to 4 different fulfillment centers. Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame.
What is your relationship with intellectual property? Because you've developed some of your own and you've also licensed it, correct?
Yeah. So most of it we've developed on our own, and then made sure to try to secure the various trademarks along the way. But we have licensed a little bit too. Scythe, one of our biggest games, was a work in progress when I discovered it, kind of a world building illustrative work in progress that I licensed the tabletop rights for. And then Red Rising is a game that we released last year that's based on a wonderful novel series that I adore, that I sought the IP for. So I think a lot of game companies maybe pursue a lot of IPs. We don't pursue a lot of them. I'm a little bit more interested in creating our own worlds and building our own worlds. But it was exciting for Red Rising in particular, because it was a book series that I loved, that some people knew, a decent number of people knew. But I also had the pleasure of sharing it with more people who had never heard of it, opposed to, say, like a Star Wars, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, where everyone has already heard of those. You're not giving it a new audience by making a game in those worlds.
I remember you did a blog post on what you were looking for when you were going to license one. And I want to do a video on that, because ultimately I would like to be more of an IP company. It's kind of where I'm trying to go. And so thinking about what you were thinking about, if you're trying to license something, when you're trying to build something, understanding what people want. But if if you're building your own, what do you, I know there are a lot of people who, it seems like I talk to, who get very, very caught up on that at the beginning, to the point that they don't get started. Like, okay, I can't even talk about this until I have a patent or something like that, which you might never get and can slow you down for years. Right. If you're trying to develop your own IP and you do want to protect it because it's something you want to grow over the years and things like that, but what's the realistic start with that?
Well, I'm sure you probably have seen my article, Your Idea is Brilliant, Your Idea is Worthless, where I kind of talk about the idea that having an idea and even starting to work on an idea is really just the tip of the iceberg. Like, it's all about the execution. Every idea that I've ever had, someone else has probably had that idea, and they just haven't executed it. They haven't done it. And so one thing that I encourage a lot of my blog is that people talk a lot more openly about their ideas, and even share the progress as they go about it. Because by sharing what you're working on, by sharing, say, a rule book that you're writing, by sharing that, you are showing people that this is your work that you created first. And so if for whatever reason someone steals it, which I think is almost unheard of, but if someone does, then you could always go back and say, hey, look, back in 2016, I was already sharing this rule book that I was working on. It's clearly there. You clearly plagiarized this. By making it more public instead of private, you have that information out there. The main thing I really do focus on is trademarks, getting the trademark for the name, so someone else can't misrepresent a brand that I put a lot of work into along the way. no one else can publish a game called Scythe and say that this is a Scythe game, because we've done that. We have that trademark. I think that's the most important legal protection. But I'm also not a lawyer, so yeah.
Well, there are some very high-profile cases where something has been stolen, something has been ripped off, and then that's what the books are written about, and then people read those, and they're like, but yeah, that one got a book written about it. So yeah, can it happen? Yeah, we've got some great cases of where that has happened, but don't build your IP, your idea off of, I got to be, aware of that's about to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are closing to the end here, but do you want to talk about what what's going on right now and where people can find you from your games that are coming out, whatever may be coming out next, but then also where you're putting out the business content so people can find that as well?
Sure. Yeah. Our most recent product is actually going back 10 years. The first product that I made, Viticulture, we have a new expansion for that called Viticulture World. That we have already run the pre-order for. It's now available on our website, and it'll be available from retailers in just about a week. I think June 22nd is the retail release date for that. It will also be at Gen Con inside a nice big box called the wine crate that we made to hold all viticulture stuff. That's at Gen Con. We also have, our biggest game is Wingspan, and we have a new expansion for Wingspan called Wingspan Asia. I haven't revealed many details about it, but I did recently reveal the continent and one card from that continent. Every month I'll be revealing a new card and then revealing all the information about it, probably in October. And so that's coming up soon. I'm really, really excited to show everybody about that. And that's one of the fun things actually about being running a business and being a creative, that we've been working on Wingspan Asia for 2 years now, at least. But we kind of keep it under wraps a little bit until it's time to really start talking about it. We don't want people to get excited about it too early. We want them to get excited about it when we're getting closer to the release. And so it's so exciting to have all this information that we built up, all these stories that we built up over the last 2 years, and then I can finally talk about it in a few months. Those are the main two things that we're working on right now. And we also, I haven't talked much about it at all, but as I mentioned here, this is our 10th anniversary at Stonemaier Games. And so our 10th anniversary month will be in September. That's when Viticulture successfully funded 10 years ago. And so we're going to be doing a bunch of fun stuff in September that I'm looking forward to. Oh, and you mentioned where to find all this content that I create at stonemeiergames.com. That's kind of the hub for everything. My YouTube channel is linked there, the podcast, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff is on stonemeiergames.com, including the entrepreneurship blog.
All right. Wonderful. Yeah. You mentioned Gen Con, and that was actually something that I had thought about, because I've talked about con strategy with people and how difficult, and you don't go. Famously, you don't go. And I think people, and I think that your strategy is a good one, because I've built convention booths, I've run them, and I think people don't understand what an immense time sink that can be.
It's a huge time sink. And money sink too.
And money sink, yes. You will, the amount of time it takes to prep and then be there and then de-prep at the end. And so that will be retailed by other people at Gen Con.
That's correct. Yeah, we work with a company called Meeple Source. We have a great partnership with them, and they enjoy Gen Con. They like going to Gen Con and having a big booth and all the excitement that comes from it. And they are very kind and gracious to carry our products there and to have a team of volunteers to demo our products there too. And I'm wondering, as you say that, this is a little off topic, but I'm curious about your thoughts. For new creators, someone who has one game or one product, let's say game for Gen Con, do you think it's worth going to a convention for a brand new creator? Because that actually seems like a pretty good time, in my perspective, for them to meet a bunch of people that they wouldn't otherwise meet. Do you think it's worth it for them?
It is that. It is that. In general, I would say if you're going to try to make running a convention booth part of your overall plan, long term, and you've got one game, like ordinarily I would say if you got one game, don't go. From the bit now, you're talking about meeting people. You may go to meet people. You could just go and meet people before you tried to set up a booth. We set up booths where we had limited products when we were first coming out, but like with Infinite Black, they went okay. It was a time sink, but we knew we wanted to do other conventions down the road. So that was also a learning experience. How do you set it up? How do you do all of this so that once we had more products and things like that, then we knew what we were doing and could scale up. So I would, if you're looking at it from a complete monetary perspective and you got one game, I would say don't try to set up a booth unless you're really looking for the long game. You're going for the long game.
I've heard that strategy from Greater Than Games, another company here in St. Louis, where they have focused on from early on. They focused on that long game. They like the idea that when they go to a convention now, they see the same people who came by their booth 10 years ago come by their booth now. They had that relationship built with those people. I admire that. I appreciate that. It isn't something that I pursue those relationships in other ways, but I like that they've figured that out for themselves.
A truism, I'll just end on this as far as running a convention booth, is that the more you have to sell, the more different products you have to sell, the more money you'll make. So if you go there with one game, unless it's already a mega hit that you know people are going to be running toward, realize you may not sell a lot. The people who have 50 different games for people to come by and shop, those people will be selling more because they've got more products. And that's just the way business is. So realize that going in. Jamey, thank you so much for being here. I want to let you go because I know you've got a lot of things to do and you got to be structured. I got All right. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I think this was a great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I'll be available in the comments after this goes up on YouTube in case anyone has some questions that we can talk about there.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.